Makes me pretty old.
Yeah.
Okay, here's Bob.
Okay, let me check and see one more time if I can bring something up on YouTube. Okay, here. How many of you remember Estes Kefauver or have heard of him? Yeah. Okay. What do you remember about him?
His name.
Yeah. Okay.
The loud hearings.
He was the father of my camp friend from Camp High Lake, David Kefauver.
Oh, really? The veterinarian now, or retired veterinarian.
And he was the running mate of Adlai Stevenson.
Right, exactly. Kefauver.
He was mentioned in the annals of the Great Motel.
I'm going to begin by showing you somebody hit the lights here. Showing you a film from 1960. This is Kefauver campaigning for John Kennedy. The fact that he's making a TV commercial means he's a national figure, really. And if we can hear him, let's see. Damn. Well, the problem is, this film, well, the problem is we got two films going on there at once, and I'm not technically good enough to talk about, to do anything about it. I have, a few years ago, when I was teaching, I had I found some film on YouTube, the excerpts from Speaking Truth to Power, the Estes Kefauver story. And I kept looking for the film, couldn't find it. This went on for several years. Finally, I wrote or sent an email to the person who owns the company, or the president of the company that made this film. And he said, well, I'll send it to you. He sent me 2 DVDs. Neither one was finished. This is an incomplete documentary. But one spent a lot of time on the 1948 election in Tennessee, in which Kefauver and Governor Gordon Browning defeated the crop machine. The crop machine ran the state for like 20 years. And I know I'm going to confuse these 2 names, so I'll just say right then. Then we had the crop machine running the state. Today we have the Trump machine. Seriously. But about 70 years there, from 1948 up to 2018, every Democrat elected to the Senate, and maybe really every Democrat elected to statewide office, and was a Kefauver-Gore Democrat, kind of in that a national Democrat instead of a Southern states' rights Democrat. And every Republican was a disciple or an ally of or protege of his successor, Howard Baker Jr. Kefauver was a man who, if we can get our equipment working, you'll see he's not a very good public speaker, but he was one of the world's best personal campaigners. I mean, if you've seen somebody who's good at going in a group like this and shaking everybody's hand and talking to them at their level, that's Kefauver. I knew 2 people back in the 70s. One died about 3 years ago, Bruce Shine, a lawyer from Kingsport, who was basically the number one protege of Kefauver. He wound up never really running for office, but he considered running for the Senate one year, and he came to MTSU. And I've never seen anybody so good at endearing such people. He went into history professor's office and looked at this obscure book on the wall that said, oh, you read so-and-so's biography of Franklin Pierce. I really like that. And started talking about Franklin Pierce, of all people. And then he went to school photographer and started talking to her about photography. I met 2 people. Another person like that was, and I can't remember his name, but Clifford Allen, when in a short time he was a congressman, he had an assistant, a person who ran his district office, who would show up at everything, and he could talk to anybody about anything. My friend was with me one time, just met me down there. We were becoming very political at this event, and he said, he said he'd like to go to dental school, and so this man started, I can't remember his name, but he started talking about dental schools and so forth. Kefauver was, let me go to the outline, bring it up. I've put a group of URLs here that these links to various things on YouTube that you can find with Kefauver, about Kefauver. Let's start at the top. This is from one of his presidential campaigns. You see again, this is the 1951 or 1551 crime committee hearings. Kefauver chaired a special select committee on crime, basically because he was just a freshman senator. He was just like a year in the Senate, and they made him chair of a special select committee on crime and interstate commerce, organized crime and interstate commerce. This is at a time when J. Edgar Hoover was denying that there was such a thing as an organized crime network. And had all these criminals. There was one fellow with, they just showed his hands, and his hands were going like this all the time. It was really dramatic. They had Frank Costello, this criminal boss in New York. They had Virginia Hill. If any of you have ever seen the movie Bugsy, with, it was about Bugsy Siegel. His girlfriend was Virginia Hill, played by
Faye Dunaway.
not Faye Dunaway.
No, his wife, Annette Bening.
Yeah, Annette Bening, that's it. And Annette looked absolutely nothing like her. You see her here, she's very flamboyant. She has this mink stole and big hat, and talks real loud, and has this real thick southern accent, southern drawl. And so very different from what Annette Bening played. Kefauver, that's for crime hearings. Later, he's running for president. This became his symbol, the coonskin cap.
My mother gave it to him.
Your mother gave him the cap?
Yeah, she was on his TV program, and on her TV program in Chattanooga, and her sponsor was the Pioneer Bank. So then he went in his drawer a little later when he was running, and Crump called him a raccoon.
Pet coon of the communist-dominated CIOs, the labor organization.
So he found it in his drawer.
And
Put it back up.
he started appearing with a live coon that started getting out of hand. So he started wearing the coonskin cap, and that became his symbol throughout 1952. And then, of course, a couple of years later, if there were any leftover coonskin caps, they all went when the Davy Crockett craze. There was a big craze in December of 1954 when the Davy Crockett show was on TV, and everybody had a coonskin cap. And then this is when he's Democratic nominee for vice president in 1956. And you see he's traveling everywhere. He's all over the West. These are mostly western, midwestern states. He was real popular out there. He's not popular in his own region, in the South. But Southern senators hated him because he wouldn't support them on a lot of hardcore segregationist measures. He evolved on that issue. Let's go down here. You see him again in Newsweek. You see him with his wife, Nancy, who was from Scotland. Her parents were American. She was they were expatriates, but she grew up in Glasgow, Scotland. They met at a country club in Chattanooga, there on Lookout Mountain in 1934. She was visiting some relatives, and they married a year later. Now, I've got to say, Kefauver had some personal matters in his life. Nobody really thought about it at that time, the rumor about it, but he had a serious drinking problem. And he may have developed his taste for scotch when they got married in Glasgow. He also had what we might call very euphemistically a wandering eye. His conduct with the Capitol Hill secretarial form was notorious. And in fact, David Halberstam, who was a great admirer of Kefauver and of Gore, said that Kefauver was known as, they called him the Claw, because he was notorious for groping women in elevators and so forth. So, but, you know, you look at his successors. You have Ross Bass and Frank Clement fighting it out for 3 years over that seat. They both had serious drinking problems. And in fact, with Kefauver, with his drinking problem, he could still show up. He's one of these people who could drink all day and it never affected him. And that's when it's time to quit. But I think this put him in an early grave, this and some other bad health habits. He was a heavy smoker and so forth. So he died at age 60 of a heart attack. Real loss for the state, I think, and a loss for the country. I can remember when I was a boy, when I was 9 years old, I saw President Kennedy speak. That was the first time I ever saw a politician speak. And Kefauver was, of course, on the stage at that time, but I really didn't know who he was. And about a year earlier, when I was like 8 years old, we watched the Huntley Brinkley Report every night. And there's something, a hearing about something, and they said, then we heard from Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee. Said, oh, look, that man's from Tennessee. So my parents didn't know that. He was from, you see him, I wanted to show him here, and we had some technical problems, but when he speaks, he has kind of a southern accent. He pronounces his I's like this, like I, and, but otherwise you don't really hear this thick drawl. He sounds very academic, very intellectual, but he grew up over here in, Monroe County, which is almost North Carolina, in Madisonville, Tennessee. He was born in 1903. One other famous Tennessean was born that year in Madisonville, Monroe County, and that was Roy Acuff. So they were born the same year, same county, but very divergent paths. He died, of course, at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Attended UT. His father was from a very prominent family, but they were not wealthy. They lived on a farm. When he was growing up, I mean, this man who's very much seems like an urban intellectual type is actually a farm boy. I mean, he and other schoolboys would go over to the blacksmith shop every day to watch the sparks fly. That was a big excitement for him. When he was 9 years old in 1912, his father took him and his brother out to campaign for Woodrow Wilson. His father was a William Jennings Bryan Democrat. William Jennings Bryan was the first really activist Democrat, first real modern Democratic nominee for president. Woodrow Wilson, whom they campaigned for, really the first modern Democratic president. And he accepted the idea that the government should get involved if necessary, if there are market failures, where markets not providing something for the people that they need, then the government should do it. He graduated from UT in 1924 and Yale Law School in 1927. He attended on partial scholarship and partly with loans. Came back to Chattanooga. He could have gone with a big, some big Eastern law firm, New York or wherever, Yale Law School, graduate, student law. But instead he came to Chattanooga. Apparently, you know, maybe he wanted a political career, we're not sure. But he joined a relatives law firm in Chattanooga. And they're doing a little bit of everything, and he got a sizable portion of what was then called the Negro business in town. Black clients would come to him because he treated them courteously, treated them like human beings. And in fact, there's one story of a black woman who had a problem. Her drunken son was taking all the money she was making, cleaning floors and whatever. And so Kefauver found out that her husband had died in an industrial accident, and everybody else had gotten a payment from the insurance company except her husband. So he got her $1,300, subtracted his fee, was maybe $100, something like that, and then set up an account in his name, but with her having access. And she could get her money anytime she wanted, and her son couldn't get anything. In 1930, he was representing a client in court and suing some big corporation, and the corporate attorney was their head of a law firm. representing the other side, and Kefauver won the case. He beat this big firm, and the leader of this firm came to him, asked to meet with him outside of court, and said, "Report to my office on Monday, and you're hired." And so he went to work for this big corporate law firm, and represented corporate clients, and kind of knew what he was talking about. I should say, by the way, his mother was from over here in Fayette County, almost in Memphis. So and they were a prominent family, the Esteses, and it was even Estes Street here in Nashville. So that kind of helped with his political career in later years. He was a consultant when the TVA first started. He was very much in favor of TVA, a supporter of TVA all his life when that was an issue. Now we don't even think about it anymore, but at the time people were talking about it as creeping socialism and so forth. He ran for the state senate in 1938 and almost won, came within, I think less than 100 votes of winning the primary at least. And he advocated two things: a state income tax and an end to the poll tax. And at that time, that was not unpopular. The poll tax everybody paid, white and black, $2 to vote. And of course, for a lot of farmers and just working people, that was a lot of money in those days. And then the income tax was popular with homeowners because at that time, Tennessee did not even have a sales tax. And so they were being hit pretty hard. So they liked the idea of an income tax, but we're still one of the few states that doesn't have an income tax. 1939, well, he was named State Commissioner of Finance and Administration under Governor Prentice Cooper. And Prentice Cooper's son, of course, is our former Congressman, Jim Cooper. He told me one time that his father used to say that he gave Estes Kefauver his first real job, which is a little hyperbolic, but he went into the House of Representatives in 1939 and served on the Judiciary and Small Business Committees. He was several times named one of the best legislators of the year. A magazine, Collier's Magazine, named the best member of the House of Representatives in 1946, or one of the best. And he had several titles like that, several awards from national publications for being very good. He wrote a book on congressional reform, 20th Century Congress, and he decided by 1948 it was time to move up or out. One thing, he incurred the wrath of segregationists. He called himself a segregationist at the time, I'm sure he was, but he was not the type who wanted to, as we'll see, he was not the type who wanted to stand in the schoolhouse door or any of that kind of crazy stuff. He supported an end to the poll tax, which the segregationists of the South hated. They wanted, that just condemned him as far as they were concerned. Senator Eastland of Mississippi called him a disgrace to the South, a disgrace to Tennessee, and a disgrace to the memory of what is his name, the big segregationist who had a statue out in front of the state capitol, Carmack, Edward Ward Carmack. He also supported, when he was in the Senate, he supported home rule for District of Columbia, sponsored a home rule bill, which was, of course, the segregationists hated as well. And he ran for the Senate in 1948. Now, the film that I have, two parts. One has a long piece about, or a long part about the 1948 election. And this is when Kefauver and Gordon Browning kind of ran together as a ticket and defeated the Crump candidates. Crump had been running the state for years and years, right? Back to like 1930. Ran Memphis, established a machine in Memphis. He had been county trustee and mayor there for a while, but mostly as a private citizen. He also served 2 terms in Congress in the 30s. Was a very pro-Roosevelt man, very pro-New Deal, very progressive, and definitely wanted new TVA before there was a TVA. And he ran the city well. It wasn't a really corrupt machine, but he extended that over the whole state. He became an enemy of Gordon Browning. Gordon Browning served 1 term as governor in 1937 to 39, And he had actually tried to rid the state of the influence of Crump by adopting a system like Georgia had, where every county had one vote. So Davidson County and Fayette County would have the same vote, which of course would be undemocratic, but it would it was, and of course the machine opposed that. Now 1948 comes along, and Boss Crump calls Kefauver cow fever, and Crump, Browning says that Crump will produce a victory if he has to empty every cemetery in Memphis, which he never really did. He built a machine, a general machine that took care of people, made sure they had coal or food or whatever they needed, as long as they voted. As long as they voted for his candidates. Black schools would get extra or get new textbooks if the black vote came in the way he wanted. And but he was definitely still a segregationist. He actually backed Strom Thurmond's independent campaign for president in 1948. So he was losing some influence. 1946, there was a rebellion over in McMinn County. Armed men actually took over the county government. It was so corrupt and was ruling with total brutality. People were just getting tired of this machine politics and being ruled by a dictator, basically. Now what happens, Crump divides his support. The incumbent senator was Tom Stewart from East Tennessee. He served 10 years. He was kind of an isolationist and didn't support the Marshall Plan or anything like that. Kefauver runs against him, and Crump loses interest in Stewart and backs another candidate, a man named John Mitchell, a judge from Cookville. And so he splits his vote there. And there's also some story, I tried to look this up, but I read it before. There was a state senator named Beasley who was a gifted mimic. He could impersonate anybody, and supposedly on election day he called the Crump lieutenants around the state and gave them confusing instructions. You gotta remember, Crump paid the poll taxes for black voters and for everybody else, and all they had to do was go vote for his candidates. There were Republican bosses in East Tennessee who did the same thing. They would have every county would have its Republican boss, and they would pay the poll taxes, and Republicans would vote in the Democratic primary, and that was still, the case until just recently. Crump basically lost that year. His candidate was defeated, or his candidates were defeated by Browning and by Kefauver. Now, in the fall of that year, let's go down. This is Crump. This is from 1940. Kefauver had come to the House of Representatives. He was a staunch backer of TVA. Senator McKellar, Kenneth McKellar, served longer than any other senator from Tennessee. He was from Memphis and kind of a product of the machine. You see him here on the left. This is when MacArthur made his famous Old Soldiers Never Die speech. This is McKellar sitting on the left where the vice president would normally sit. He was president pro tem of the Senate. And so the candidates, Crump's candidates were defeated that year. I want to show you some of the people who were involved in this. You see, of course, John Mitchell, who was Crump's official candidate, ran third, Stewart second. But this is really interesting here. John Neal, who never got, he only got about 1% of the vote. John Neal was this very eccentric lawyer from East Tennessee who, and law professor at UT. Law degree from Vanderbilt, PhD from Columbia. Very intelligent man, a perennial candidate. He ran for governor and for senator both about 20 times each. And if they were to walk in here today, I think everybody would probably leave because John Neal didn't believe in bathing. He didn't believe in changing his clothes. He wore the same suit all week long and never changed it, never even when he went to bed. And if anybody protested or complained to him, he'd say, "You're interfering in my protest against conformity." He called it his protest against conformity. Very strange man, very intelligent, genius, but kind of one of these people who's mad but harmless, like me. A mad genius, I guess you would say. And the reason I bring this up is because Stewart was a prosecutor in the 1925 Scopes trial. He was the lead prosecutor. Neal was the lead defense attorney. Interesting. So those two are running against each other. Oh, damn it. Let's see if I can. Okay, here we go. Okay, he went to the Senate, of course, and served on the Judiciary Committee. He chaired a subcommittee on juvenile delinquency in 1955-57. They looked into such dangers as comic books, and Betty Page was called as a witness. If you see, I've included on this a link to the film Notorious Betty Page, and it opens with Kefauver chairing a hearing, which she actually never testified. She was called, but she didn't. He was a big, his issues, TVA and public power. Senator McKellar wanted to control TVA as his own personal patronage. He wanted every job there to go through him. And he hated the chair of the TVA, David Lilienthal, tried to fire him, get him fired, and Lilienthal later, I think he headed the Atomic Energy Commission. But Kefauver opposed him on this. And so he and McKellar were not getting along. They got along right at first, but later they were just bitter enemies. McKellar, by the way, is the person who brought the atomic aids to Tennessee. He was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and Roosevelt called him in and said, "We need a secret appropriation. We need to hide an appropriation for a secret plant we're going to build." And McKellar supposedly said, "Well, Mr. President, where in Tennessee are we going to hide it? Appropriate would be a nice place." He was very good at getting things for state and was actually pretty progressive on the issues, but just kind of an old-fashioned machine-type Democrat. And the last term, he got pretty conservative, reactionary. He opposed the Dixon-Yates bill. In the 50s, one of the reasons he became so popular in the West, public power was a popular issue in the West back then. They wanted to build dams. They wanted for public power, basically, and flood control and so forth. And Dixon-Yates controversy, the Eisenhower administration, Eisenhower made some comments that made it sound as if he didn't like TVA, which he didn't. He thought it was socialism. And a company called Dixon-Yates was a power company that's brought in to provide power to TVA customers, and they saw this as a way of destroying TVA. And so Kefauver and Gore led opposition to that, and that made them both very popular speakers in the West. On the civil rights, he opposed the poll tax and he opposed the filibuster. Although he used the filibuster himself. In fact, when he died, well, like a lot of people who oppose the filibuster today, they still use it. When he died, he had a heart attack on the floor of the Senate when he was leading a filibuster against a satellite bill, a communication satellite bill. He wanted the communication satellite, but he thought the taxpayer should get more money by putting it into the space. The taxpayer was paying to put it in space. The private industry shouldn't get all the money. That's the way he saw it. He opposed the poll tax and filibuster, sponsored D.C. home rule, which is another thing that the Southerners would fight him on. They hated him. 1954, he always called himself a segregationist before, but he basically accepted the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, and when other Southern senators would not. And then he and Gore and 5 members of the House of Representatives from Tennessee did not sign the Southern Manifesto. Southern Manifesto was something Southern senators and congressmen signed saying they would provide massive resistance to school segregation. And not only Kefauver and Gore, but 5 of our members of Congress, 3 Democrats and the 2 Republicans from East Tennessee, did not sign that. One of them was Howard Baker Sr., the father of Kefauver's successor. And I was looking over some of the things that people had to say about Kefauver when he died, and they all talked about his warm smile, his handshake, and his friendliness, and his charm, and so forth. And one of them was Howard Baker Sr. He said Kefauver came in when I ran for Congress in 1950, came in campaign for my opponent, but then when after the campaign was over and I was sworn into the House, the first visitor was Kefauver, who came in, signed his guest book, and sat for a half hour, told him we were friends at UT, and we're still friends today, and we'll work together on some issues when we can, and like that. And that's the way, the delegation was like that. They would, Republicans, Democrats, they would work together on these projects in Tennessee. It got a little out of hand in the 70s. We started doing a lot of things that I think we could have lived better off without, but until recently, that was the way they worked. Now it's all Republicans, but he voted for the civil rights bills of 1957 and 60. He got some flack because he supported jury trials. The Southerners wanted jury trials for anybody who was prosecuted for violating civil rights, and the supporters of the legislation were saying, no, these people will get off. As it turns out, this is your right. You have a right to a jury trial, number one. And as it turns out, in the 60s, a lot of these people, these Klansmen that got away with murder, were prosecuted for violating civil rights, and because of this legislation. Civil liberties. He was probably the most prominent civil libertarian in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, either one. He voted against the McCarran Act, and we're going to talk about Senator McCarran. We have a real cult cast of characters here. The Civil Rights Act of, what was I getting ready to say? Well, McCarran sponsored a bill to register communists, and he voted against that. And he voted in 1954 as the only member of the Senate to vote against a bill sponsored by Hubert Humphrey, of all people, to ban the Communist Party of the United States. And he proved right. That's whoever right can belong to any political party they want. I forgot to mention something important here. I'm kind of going back and forth. Let's see, where is, okay. 1948, in the fall, after he won the primary, the Republicans thought they might get the support of Trump, but they nominated for the Senate. They actually ran a serious campaign that year for the first time since 1920, maybe. And their candidate for the Senate was the man who had dominated politics in the 1st District in Kingsport, Tri-Cities area. And that is Carol Reese. Carol Reese was elected in 1920 to the House of Representatives from the 1st District, one of the most Republican districts in the country. And he dominated politics until his death in 1961 in that district. And despite the fact that in 1921 he was arrested in a railroad men's room, and guess what he's arrested for? What are people arrested for in men's rooms? He's arrested for soliciting male sex. But somehow he managed to get past that and dominated the congressional district. He was an ultra-conservative Robert Taft, a Republican. Robert Taft, a leading ultra-conservative at his time, kind of Jesse Helms, except without the kind of backwoods racism or so forth. But they chose his running mate, Roy Acuff. He ran for governor in 1948. Roy would come out and play the fiddle and do yo-yo tricks and so forth, and people would leave. Nobody paid any attention to what Reese was saying, and he only got about 35% of the vote that fall. So their first Republican effort failed in 1948. Of course, they've gone on to prove themselves since then. Now, 1950, some mayors around the city were worried about organized crime. One of them is Delessis Morrison in New Orleans, who's home of the Dixie Mafia. But they appealed to Congress to do an investigation, and full Senate committee didn't want to deal with. Interstate Farm Commerce Committee didn't deal with it, so they decided to set up a select committee. And make a long story short, Kefauver was named as head of his subcommittee. The publisher of the Washington Post told him if he heads the subcommittee, he might be Democratic nominee for vice president in 1952. The current vice president at that time was in his 70s, Alban Barkley. And for the first year in 1950, there were all kinds of newspaper coverage, made Kefauver famous, it made a lot of gangsters famous. And then in 1951, it was televised. Time magazine actually sponsored the hearings in New York, and they were riveting. You had, like I talked about, the people like Virginia Hill, and this is a fellow, I can't remember his name, but he testified he gave a $5,000 payoff to the mayor of New York and so forth. This is Senator McCarran of Nevada. If you've seen, again, the movie Bugsy, or not movie Bugsy, actually, there's another movie, Godfather Part 2. There's a congressional hearing there that really is based on the Kefauver hearings, although McCarran went on it. But this character, this senator from Nevada, is based on McCarran. And there's a scene where he's meeting with the mafia dudes, and he says, "Well, I don't like you people coming out here with your greasy hair." Then later in the movie, you see him walking out of the committee hearing saying, "This is terrible what they're doing to the Italian-American people. Well, the Italian-Americans are great people," and so forth. Just a little hypocrite. And he is the one who sponsored the McCarran Act, of course, which is the Communist Registration Act. He was ultra-conservative. I have a biography at home that says he was the Democratic version of Joe McCarthy, only a lot worse. He actually got a lot of people fired from their government jobs. 1952, Kefauver, well, I should say more. This became a sensation in 1951, just like some of you may remember the Watergate hearings, and of course Howard Baker, his successor, became famous through that. It made him so famous that people were talking about him running for president. Of course, Democrats had an incumbent president, Harry Truman, but he had, with the MacArthur firing, he was kind of unpopular, only had about 30% of poll ratings. Kefauver went to Truman and said, if you're going to run, just tell me and I won't run. And Truman wouldn't say anything. Truman hated Kefauver anyway. The Kefauver hearings, he had one of the places where they had hearings, they had them all over the country. It was Kansas City, his hometown. They looked into his former political machine that had sponsored him. And so Truman didn't like Kefauver to begin with. I have a book at home where of Truman's letters to his wife, and he goes off about Kefauver and how much he can't stand, what a hypocrite he is, and so forth and so on. 1952, he ran for president. He won all but one of the primaries. The only primary he lost was in Florida. He lost to Senator Russell of Georgia, Richard Russell. And most of the primaries at that time he was unopposed, and he also, the primaries are basically beauty contests. They didn't have delegates. So, and he just didn't have the campaign financing he needed to bring, to finance a delegate operation. And so he is going on to the floor of the convention to withdraw from the race with, he goes in with Illinois Senator Paul Douglas, and is humiliated. They won't talk to him. They nominated Adlai Stevenson, who was not a candidate. As it turns out, Stevenson, I put on one of the URLs I put on the outline is Stevenson's 1952 acceptance speech, where he electrified the convention, and I urge you to see that. And it's only 16 minutes long, and if you look at the last 6 minutes, you get the best part of it. It's a very eloquent, brilliant speech. It's just a call to greatness. It doesn't really talk about policy at all. 1956, Kefauver ran for, well, he had a difficult re-election in 1954, but he won pretty easily. In 1956, he runs for president again, but he loses 2 primaries to Stevenson's, Florida and California, the 2 biggest states, and so he withdraws. And let's talk about him for vice president. Let's talk about John Kennedy, senator from Massachusetts, as vice president, Hubert Humphrey, mayor of New York, Robert Wagner, and Albert Gore. And all of them run for vice president. What happens is Stevenson does something no candidate has done since. He announced to the convention he would not choose anyone. He would let the convention, the delegates, choose the running mate. The reason he did this was because the one issue they were using against Eisenhower that year was the vice presidency. Eisenhower had 2 heart attacks by that time. And the vice presidency became important, and of course Richard Nixon is next in line to be president, and he's a very controversial character then and now. And so he wanted to open up this process. It actually made him look indecisive, basically, in the end. But it turns into a race. You have several candidates, and they're eliminated as time goes. It comes down to 3 candidates: Gore, Kefauver, and Kennedy. And the Tennessee delegation is backing Gore. It's controlled by Governor Frank Clement, who wants the nomination himself. He gave a keynote speech that year, and initial speech was pretty good, but it went on and on and on and on and on, and looked terrible on television. That kind of eliminated him as a national possibility. Gore was a candidate of the South, but the South began switching to Kennedy. They would rather have this Massachusetts Catholic than Kefauver. And so some members of the Tennessee delegation go and find Gore, and they tell him, if you don't get out of this race, we're going to give you a hard time in 2 years when you're up for re-election. So Gore, without saying a word, goes on to the floor. He gets the recognition of the convention chair and withdraws. And of course, the place goes into pandemonium, and Kefauver is nominated for vice president. Kennedy later saw this as a blessing because he came out kind of the true star of that convention. Said about 4 years later, had he been Democratic nominee for vice president, they would have blamed Stevenson's defeat on him for being Catholic. Let me show you, if I can bring it up. Where is it? Okay. This is Kefauver's acceptance speech, and I hope the volume and everything will work on this. Oh, Christ.
Sounds like the Godfather.
Yeah. Oh, the problem, this is a DVD. And for some reason it's playing now and I can't stop it. And I can't even find it right now. Where the hell? It's not gonna. It doesn't look like we're gonna get that. Damn it. That's it. There. God damn it. This is not.
Memphis had a Western orientation because of its trade connections up and down river.
Let's just cut that out for a minute and let's see if we can bring this. Okay. Tennessee Waltz in the background.
You got the roster to acknowledge cheers to a victory smile.
Mrs. Kefauver was born in Scotland that day, wasn't she, David?
This is the first time Huntley and Briefly worked together. Is this connection?
All the story, he met her over here. He went to go back to Scotland, and he went back to Scotland to get there. Well, it was a great measurement. It still is.
It's a song we won't play, don't recognize.
Delegates the other night, David, and you know California was all for Kefauver in '52, and as I said the other night, sure, sometimes he appears to be awkward, he seems to make mistakes in his campaigns, but yet we love him.
He does seem to inspire some kind of very fierce loyalty among the people. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the convention, I don't know how all of you feel, but I sure am tired. Back a long time ago, I went to the University of Tennessee and I was on the truck team. I've been in a lot of races, but I never have been in one like this. And I never have been in a race with a finer, more wonderful contender. Senator Jack Kennedy is one of the fine young statesmen with an outstanding record already, and to be able to contend and finally win against him, I appreciate very much. Ladies and gentlemen, every member that I had to contend against, all of these 8 or 9 men who were placed in nomination, every one of them are able, capable of performing this office, I think, better than I. I want to express my appreciation to Senator Kennedy for his graciousness in moving that the nomination be unanimous. I'm very grateful to all of you who supported me. And to all of you who voted to make my nomination unanimous. I can only say that as a member of the team, I shall try to do my utmost to hold up my part of the job, working the very best I can in all places where I may be able to go in order to do what I can for the election of a man whom I'm sure will go down in history as one of the great President of the United States, Adelaide Stevens. I know we're going to have a wonderful meeting tonight. I will look forward to coming back and having a chance of talking with you later then. Thank you.
Okay. This is from 1960. Speech on behalf of John Kennedy.
A message from Estes Kefauver. Why do I feel so strongly about the necessity of a democratic victory this fall? The never-ending struggle to assure that every American has a fair, full, and equal opportunity. The fight for a free enterprise system, unstifled by monopoly practices, such as those we revealed among some of the big drug manufacturers. The development again of the natural resources of our land, a concern again for the welfare of all of our people, and a restoration of the growth of our economy. More jobs, more production. In other words, the necessity to get on the move again. In John F. Kennedy, we have a vigorous leader who tells us what we're up against and tells us what we must do to pull ahead. In Lyndon B. Johnson, we will have a vice president who is not only an outstanding legislator, but a man whom President Roosevelt was proud to call his protege. I hope that you will vote for these two outstanding Americans, Kennedy and Johnson.
How much time we got left? 3 minutes? Oh my gosh. Well, I guess rather than showing you that film about the, let's finish up this. I won't have the time to show you that film about the crime hearings, but if anybody wants to invite me over to their house, we can play it for you there. The whole thing if you want. This is here are some books about Kefauver that you might find interesting, as well as the YouTube links. And at the end, I put the draft of an article I wrote a few years ago, which was published in the Tennessean, about the Blunt seat. This is Senate seat once held by John Blunt, the first senator from Tennessee, and then later held by Kefauver, Ross Bass, Howard Baker, Al Gore, Fred Thompson, and Lamar Alexander, all of whom ran for president, all except Bass, of course, he was just there 2 years. But all the others actually ran for presidents and were considered credible candidates for president. And they all had an effect on the country. Kefauver, big thing, I need to mention this before I go, his big issue was antitrust and monopoly. He got interested in this issue when a newspaper in Chattanooga that backed him was bought by the utility company owned by Wendell Willkie, or which Wendell Willkie was president of. Wendell Willkie, 1940 Republican nominee for president. And they suddenly became anti-Kefauver, and he began looking into the antitrust implications there. He sponsored in 1951 the Kefauver Cellar Bill, which closed the loophole in the Clayton Antitrust Act. So he's very big on antitrust and monopoly, and he became, in 1957, we hear a lot about drug companies today and high price of drugs and whatever, monopolies, price gouging, and so forth. And Kefauver was looking at that in 1957. He held hearings. He couldn't get any legislation passed, but in 1962, there was a thalidomide scandal, and which people were being born with all kinds of deformities and so forth. And I'm trying to find where, well, I must not put anything there about that, but he managed to get that passed in 1962 with the thalidomide scandal. And in fact, there's a cartoon here. Yeah, this one shows Everett Dirksen, a Republican leader, and Senator Eastland, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, arch reactionaries, and there's a Kefauver drug regulation bill in the trash, and they're saying, gee, something ought to be done about this. We ought to consider some legislation about this. 1962, I know Congressman Joe Evans told me one time, some of you may remember him, he was one of Tennessee's longest serving congressmen, and Kefauver tried to get him in the race for governor in 1962 because he was worried about Clement. Clement would not be running for re-election in 4 years, and so he might run against Kefauver. Evans decided against it. He controlled a bigger budget in Washington than he did here, so it's up to him to determine. But he, my feeling is, had Kefauver lived, the Republican era in Tennessee, the two-party era, and then now the Republican would have come, but it would have been a little longer. I think Kefauver would have been re-elected in '66. I don't think either Howard Baker or Clement would have run against him. Baker would probably have run for his father's House seat in 1964 when his father died. Instead, his stepmother ran for that seat and held it for a short time. So those are the main points with Kefauver. Does anybody have questions? Or if I answered them?
In that 56 convention, did it go multiple?
Yeah, it went several ballots.
How many ballots?
I can't remember how many ballots, but it
There's
went
been a
several ballots.
convention since then that's gone multiple ballots?
Yeah. Since then, I don't think we've had any convention that have gone multiple ballots, but I'm not sure about that. You had several people running. The mayor of New York, Robert Wagner, Hubert Humphrey ran, and they were eliminated in the early ballots, and it came down to those three, Gore, Kennedy, and Kefauver. And of course, once Gore got out, then Kefauver was running. One thing they mentioned in that film is that Kefauver was not a very good speaker. But he would make all kinds of mistakes and forget where he was and that sort of thing, and that endeared him to people. People liked him because of that. And of course, he was such a great personal campaigner. He'd come in and shake hands with everybody in the room and make you feel like he was a personal friend. He had a Christmas card with us that was 50,000 names on it. And he had friends all over the country, people sending. He was one of the first that got contributions from all over the country. People loved him. He was a major political superstar in the 1950s, the first media star. David Halberstam talks about him in his book, The 50s, as the first great media star, a man who was not looking for that media attention, but he got it, and once he got it, he ran with it. Yes?
If you could recommend one book about Kefauver, which one would you recommend?
Right, the Fontenay biography is probably the most included. Charles Fontenay used to work for the Tennessean, and he published a biography in 1978 at UT Press. You can find it, I'm sure, in any library. He had worked on, there was a 1956 campaign biography. It was written by Jack Anderson, if you remember him. And he had done a lot of research for that book, and so a lot of that material was carried over into the 1978 biography. The 71 biography, I remember reading in 1970, there was a volunteer for Albert Gore Sr. in his re-election campaign, and was kind of depressed about his losing. And a year later, my aunt had a copy of Kefauver's biography, and I read that and became fascinated. In fact, the first time I ever gave a presentation to a history class was in a class I had at MTSU about Kefauver.
There's an interesting museum in Las Vegas called Mob Museum, and they've got a great display about Kefauver and the hearings.
I found in fact, I don't think I included it here, but I found a link to Kefauver Day at 2018 at that Mob Museum. They were going to have a Kefauver Day, free admission. You come see a display about the Kefauver hearings and so forth. There was, a few years ago, there was a American Experience. Some of you may watch American Experience on PBS. They did something about Las Vegas, and they talked about Kefauver, whom they mispronounced his name. They called him Estes Kefauver, and taught him as an opportunist, and and so forth, which a lot of people in the early days thought. But you've got to look at who his enemies were. If I can bring that up. You got to remember who his enemies were. He, and I've got a list of them here somewhere. As I said, there are a lot of colorful characters involved in this. well, I've got it here somewhere, but, what were we talking about?
His enemies.
His enemies. His enemies were monopolists, they were mobsters, they were segregationists, political machines. I mean, it's a good thing he had these enemies. I mean, you can tell something about a person by the enemies they made. And those people, of course, they spread this opportunists and so forth. I'm sure he took advantages like any other politician, but that's a man who did some. It's kind of like my mother. I asked her one time. This would be back when I was in college. I had read that biography. I said, "Do you remember Kefauver?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "What do you think of him?" She said, "Well, a lot of people didn't like him, but I thought it was good that he's investigating these criminals." And he was. Anti-crime was his anti-crime, anti-monopoly, and pro-TVA and pro-consumer. One of the first. And in his early days, he's considered a maverick. But then later, after 1954, a lot of new Democrats came to the Senate and all looked up to him as a hero. And a lot of them were from the West. In 1956, Stevenson's vote actually increased in the western states. And Kefauver was able to help Frank Church get elected to the Senate in Idaho and George McGovern get elected to the House in South Dakota. So he was very good for the western states, and particularly when you're running against somebody as popular as Eisenhower, who won in a landslide. Anything else?
I know you're running over a little bit, but I have to ask, some years ago I saw a photograph of the state capitol building with the huge coonskin cap on the cupola that had been created, I believe, by Chris Tibbett, who some of you may know Chris's name, but can you add it? Are you familiar with what I'm referring to? This is it had something to do with Kefauver and his coonskin cap, and as I say, it was a giant coonskin cap that covered the top of the state house.
When I lived up in Maryland.
I know I'm not making this up. I've tried to find it since then, and I had felt like I'm making it up, and I thought, well, here's a man who can confirm that this thing happened, that it exists.
Well, I'm sure the coonskin cap definitely existed. I have a friend who has a Kefauver button, or I had a friend years ago, I haven't seen him in a long time, but he had a Kefauver button, which he found somewhere in Iowa, and it has a coonskin cap on it. So that was his symbol for a long time. And after 1954, I think he quit wearing it. And his family prevailed upon him, and it's like Gore and his fiddle. Gore's family didn't want him to play the fiddle anymore until he was a game show contacted him. They heard he played the fiddle. They wanted to come and offer him $1,000, and he turned it down. Said, "My wife doesn't want to do that anymore." And then Miss Pauline, if you know anything about her, she's a real politician in the family, and she said to Albert, "Now I could get that mink coat I've wanted, and we'll get a free trip to New York." And so she called them up and got $2,500 out. Well, yeah.
Wearing dead animals on your head's kind of like the current election.
I'm not sure I want to get off I can imagine what Kefauver would say about Trump or some of those other people.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Bob.